Pick that up, sweetheart. That is what Dr. Caldwell said 47 minutes before 2 Coast Guard helicopters landed in his parking lot. Seattle General in Portland hums with fluorescent lights and antiseptic tang at 2 a.m. Natalie Hayes moves through the ICU with invisible efficiency, refilling charts, checking vitals, adjusting full lines with hands that never hesitate. For days into night shift. For days of watching. For days of learning exactly how this hospital breathes. Her left hand trembles slightly when she thinks no one is watching. Just the fingers. Just when she's alone in the medication closet, reading labels that blur together. She presses her palm flat against the cool stainless steel shelf and counts her breaths. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. A discipline learned in places where trembling got people killed. The trembling stops. She moves to bed 7 and pauses. Commander Price lies unconscious under a quilted blanket, 9 bullet wounds mapped across his torso like a geography of Tikrit. Entry wounds. Exit wounds. The damage log of a man who should be dead and isn't. And 4 drip steady in his left arm. The heart monitor traces its green peaks and valleys with metronome precision. Stable. For now. Natalie reaches into her scrub pocket and touches the tarnished challenge coin there, worn smooth from hands that kept it close through 3 tours and 1,000 nights like this one. The metal is cold. Real. Her son had asked about it just before she left for her shift. Why does Commander Price's name look scratched into the back, Mom? She hadn't answered. Some things a 12-year-old doesn't need to understand yet. A scar runs along her jawline, thin as a whisper. Nobody here has asked about it. Dr. Caldwell arrives for his rounds at 2:51 a.m., his presence changing the air pressure in the ICU the way a storm front changes a room before the rain comes. He wears an expensive watch, a Rolex, the kind that costs more than most nurses make in 3 months, and his white coat hangs off his shoulders like he was born wearing it. Behind him follows a surgical resident, a young man whose eyes are already learning to flatten into something careful and afraid. Caldwell picks up Commander Price's chart from the foot of the bed without looking at it first. Just holds it. Makes a show of his authority before he even reads a single line. The resident stands 2 steps back, exactly where Caldwell trained him to stand. "You're new here," Caldwell says, finally glancing at the chart, his eye scanning Natalie's handwriting. "Hayes, is it?" "Yes, doctor." "Learn to be less thorough." He sets the chart down with deliberate slowness, the metal clip clattering against the plastic holder. "Nursing is about efficiency, not documentation. Understand? I document what I observe." His smile doesn't reach his eyes. It's the smile of a man used to people agreeing with him. Observations are subjective. Stick to vitals. Temperature, blood pressure, pulse. Leave the interpretation to physicians. The resident shifts his weight. Even he knows something is wrong with that instruction. Natalie says nothing. Her jaw clenches once. Her hands remain perfectly steady. She has learned that silence is a kind of power, one that men like Caldwell don't understand because they've never had to survive without the sound of their own voice filling every room. What she does not say, "I've documented 3 separate billing code anomalies on this patient's transfer paperwork. Commander Price was admitted through emergency trauma protocol, but his scheduled procedures list includes 3 elective diagnostics that contradict emergency-only treatment pathways. One of those procedures is flagged to a private surgical contractor called Meridian Medical Solutions. The same contractor that appears on billing records for 17 other trauma patients transferred through this ER in the last 8 weeks. What she does not say, "I know what you're doing." Caldwell reviews the rest of the chart with theatrical efficiency, turning pages without reading them, his eyes already moving past the information toward whatever meeting comes next. The resident copies him, though with less certainty. A hierarchy of learned carelessness. Vital stable. Caldwell asks, though he's not looking at her when he asks it. BP 142/88. Heart rate 76. O2 sat 98% on room air. Temperature 37.1 Celsius. Excellent. No changes to current treatment. Keep monitoring, nothing more. He returns the chart and walks past her without another word, the resident trailing behind like a ship following a wake. The fluorescent lights buzz their relentless hum. Somewhere down the hall, a ventilator hisses its mechanical breath. Natalie waits until they round the corner before she looks at the chart again. Her eyes move faster now. Numbers and codes and dates. Commander Price's transfer paperwork shows his arrival at 1847 hours, admitted through emergency trauma protocol with 9 gunshot wounds. Stable vital signs upon arrival. No fever. No signs of infection. No indication of complications. Then the scheduled procedures list appears: CT angiography with contrast, exploratory ultrasound protocol, cardiac enzyme panel with extended markers. 3 procedures. 3 separate charges. The CT angiography routes through Meridian Medical Solutions with a procedure code that doesn't match trauma protocols. She has seen this pattern before. Not here. But before. The challenge coin in her pocket feels heavier. Natalie moves through the rest of her shift with practiced invisibility. She checks 4 sites at 0400 hours. She documents fluid intake and output at 0500 hours. She refills the water pitcher in bed 7 and notices Commander Price's fingers twitching slightly, REM sleep, probably. Dreams of places he should have left behind. She understands those dreams. By 0630 hours, the day shift staff arrives and the ICU transforms. The fluorescent lights seem brighter. The antiseptic smell grows sharper. New voices replace the quiet. Natalie provides hand-off report to the day nurse, speaking in clipped professional tones, her voice level and factual. Commander Price, stable overnight. No temperature spike. Vitals remain consistent. Alert to name and command response. Force patent. Foley catheter output adequate. Pain management per current protocol. The day nurse nods, already reviewing the chart. She seems competent. Thorough. The kind of nurse who will catch things if she knows what she's looking for. Natalie doesn't tell her about the billing codes. Not yet. That information needs to move through careful channels, needs witnesses and documentation that can't be unwritten or dismissed. She signs out and walks through the hospital corridors as the morning staff arrives, doctors in their white coats, nurses changing shift, cleaning staff pushing carts that smell like industrial bleach. Nobody looks at her twice. A woman in scrubs is invisible in a hospital. She could be anyone. She could be nothing. That's exactly what Dr. Caldwell believes. What he doesn't know is that Natalie Hayes isn't working at Seattle General because she needs a job. She isn't a nurse because it's a career. She's a nurse because 2 weeks ago her son asked her why Commander Price kept coming to the house, why he sometimes stayed for dinner, why he said things like "Your mom's the strongest person I know" in a voice that sounded like gratitude. She'd told her son the truth: Commander Price is someone we trust. He's kept people alive when it mattered. Her son had asked, "Like you do?" And Natalie understood, in that moment, that there were things her son needed to know about her that she couldn't tell him directly. So she got hired at Seattle General. Got herself placed on night shift. Made sure she was here when emergency traumas came through the doors. She made sure she was here for Commander Price when he arrived with 9 bullet wounds and a medical record already being carved into fraud. The parking lot is cool with early morning rain. Natalie walks to her car, a 2014 Honda Civic, anonymous and reliable, and sits in the driver's seat without starting the engine. She removes the challenge coin from her pocket and turns it over in her palm. One side shows an anchor with a trident. The other side bears an inscription: United States Coast Guard, North Atlantic Sector, 2003 to 2006, Phantom Actual. The nickname. The rank. The years. She had been Phantom Actual once. Before motherhood. Before the injury that changed everything. Before the discharge papers that said medical separation, honorable, recommendation for civilian placement. Her son doesn't know what phantom actual means. He just knows that his mom is a nurse who works nights and reads military history books and sometimes sits on the porch looking toward the ocean like she's waiting for something to arrive. Commander Price knows. That's why he comes to dinner. That's why he watches her son with the attention of someone who has already decided to protect him if the world ever requires it. The challenge coin goes back into her pocket. Natalie starts the car and drives home through Portland rain, past coffee shops opening for breakfast, past people going about their ordinary days. She will sleep for 6 hours. Then she will wake up, make her son breakfast, help him with his homework, and do all the things that ordinary mothers do. Tonight, she will return to Seattle General and watch Dr. Caldwell continue his fraud. She will document every anomaly. She will wait. And when the moment comes, and it will come, she will move from invisibility into purpose. The rain hammers her windshield like applause for something she hasn't done yet. The cafeteria at 3 o'clock smelled like institutional chicken and burnt coffee, the fluorescent lights humming their endless mechanical song above rows of plastic tables. Dr. Caldwell stood near the beverage station with 2 attending physicians, his voice loud enough to carry 3 tables deep. "I'll give her until Friday," he said, not bothering to lower his volume. New nurses like that, his eyes flicked toward Natalie, who sat alone with a tray of scrambled eggs and toast, they don't last when they can't follow simple instructions. The attending physicians laughed on cue, the sound of men who understood that laughter was currency in hospital hierarchies. "What's the wager?" one of them asked. 200 say she quits by week's end. Maybe sooner if I push the right buttons. Caldwell smiled, the kind of smile that made the air feel thinner. She keeps leaving these little notes about protocol deviations. Like she thinks she understands how this place works. Like she thinks she matters. Natalie's jaw clenched once. Just once. Her hands remained exactly where they were, one wrapped around a water glass, one resting on the table beside her tray. Her face showed nothing. No flush of anger. No downward glance. No tremor in her shoulders. She continued eating, methodical and steady, as if the bet being placed about her departure was something she'd read in yesterday's newspaper. As if it had nothing to do with her at all. The thing about being invisible was that invisibility was a choice. And Natalie had learned to choose it perfectly. 17 years of choosing it. 3 deployments of choosing it. 2 Purple Hearts awarded to a name that nobody in this cafeteria would ever speak. The challenge coin in her pocket, tarnished from 100 missions, smooth from 1,000 nervous touches, pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat. She could feel it there. That was enough. 20 minutes later, Caldwell walked past her table while she was still at the beverage station refilling her coffee. His elbow accidentally caught the corner of her tray just hard enough. The physics were deliberate. The angle was precise. Scrambled eggs, orange juice, and a ceramic mug of coffee cascaded across the tile floor in a yellow-orange wave, splattering across her white scrubs and pooling around her feet. The cafeteria went absolutely silent. Forks paused mid-bite. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every eye in the room turned toward the sound of breaking ceramic. "Oh, sweetheart, so clumsy," Caldwell said, his laughter echoing off the walls like something that belonged in a much larger space. His voice had the texture of gravel scraping concrete. "Better pick that up before someone slips. Liability, you know. Hospital protocol." His 2 physician friends joined in, their laughter higher-pitched, less confident, the laughter of men who were copying a stronger animal. New nurses always make such a mess their first week. Natalie moved before the silence could settle into something permanent. She knelt without a word, her movements economical and precise, and began gathering broken ceramic with paper napkins that appeared in her hand like she'd pulled them from muscle memory alone. A younger nurse from pediatrics started toward her with a roll of paper towels, but Caldwell waved her off with one hand, still smiling. "Let her handle it. She needs to learn hospital protocol. Especially the part about following instructions and not asking questions that are above her pay grade." Natalie's knuckles did not whiten. Her breathing did not change. Her face remained as blank as fresh snow. She wiped eggs from the tile, her movement steady enough to guide a needle between ribs, steady enough to hold a life together when everything else was falling apart. Nobody watching her saw the calculus happening behind her eyes. Nobody saw the 17 years of training that taught her that the greatest weapon she owned was the ability to show nothing. No anger. No shame. No humanity that could be leveraged against her. She was a surface. A function. A task to be completed and forgotten. The room stayed quiet. That was the worst part. Not the laughter, but the silence that followed, the silence of colleagues who wouldn't meet her eyes, who suddenly became very focused on their salads and their phones. A silence that said everyone had seen the bet being placed. Everyone had watched Caldwell's elbow connect with her tray. Everyone had understood it was deliberate. And none of them would say a word about it. She finished cleaning at 3:11 p.m. and disposed of the paper towels in a trash bin that smelled like old meat and bleach. By 4:13 p.m., she was charting in the break room, her hands moving through the familiar geography of a patient file, medical terminology flowing from her fingers like a language she'd spoken longer than English. Her scrubs were still damp in places. A piece of eggshell had caught in her hair unnoticed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came at 6:48 p.m. when she found herself in the fourth-floor supply closet, the door locked behind her, gripping the sink's edge with both hands. The closet was narrow and fluorescent lit, lined with boxes of gauze and saline bags and sterile instruments wrapped in blue cloth. It smelled like antiseptic and metal. Natalie's knuckles were white. Her breathing came carefully through her nose, controlled and deliberate, the kind of breathing she'd learned in places where sound could get you killed. In and out. In and out. The muscles in her shoulders trembled, not from fear, but from the effort of holding everything inside. From the discipline of being a vessel that could not break. Could not spill. Could not let anyone see the earthquake happening beneath her skin. Her son had asked her once, 3 years ago when he was 9, why she didn't cry at movies like other mothers. She'd told him that tears were a luxury. That in her line of work, crying meant losing focus. Meant losing control. Meant getting yourself or someone you loved killed. He'd accepted that explanation the way children accept the rules they're given without understanding why those rules have to exist. But standing in that supply closet with her hands shaking and her throat tight and her eyes burning from the effort of not letting them water, Natalie understood something else entirely. She'd gotten so good at holding it together that she'd forgotten how to let it go. Even alone. Even when nobody was watching. She breathed. In and out. In and out. The fluorescent light hummed above her like an insect trapped in a fluorescent tube. Outside, somewhere down on the 3rd floor, Dr. Caldwell was probably telling the story again, embellishing the details, collecting his $200 bet in increments of admiration and professional respect. At 6:45 p.m., Natalie left the supply closet. Her scrubs were mostly dry now. Her face showed nothing. Her voice was steady when she asked the evening shift charge nurse for an assignment update. Nobody asked her why she looked like she'd been crying. Nobody dared. By 7:11 p.m., she was checking vitals on the night shift patients. Her hand moved with the precision of someone who'd practiced this particular skill set in a field hospital in Kandahar with artillery fire close enough to feel the percussion through the tent fabric. Every number she recorded was exact. Every 4 line was secure. Every medication dose was verified twice. She was the kind of nurse who made things work quietly. The kind of nurse who didn't need recognition or respect because recognition and respect were secondary to the actual work of keeping people alive. The night shift stretched quiet and long. Commander Price slept under monitors, his breathing steady, his wounds bandaged with military-grade dressing that Natalie had sourced from contacts she'd never officially acknowledge. The challenge coin stayed in her pocket. Her son's commanding officer stayed alive. The fraud scheme continued humming in the background like a fluorescent light that nobody had bothered to turn off, draining resources meant for people who couldn't afford to lose them. Natalie charted in silence at the nurse's station. She was still there at 11:56 p.m., pulling up Commander Price's scheduled procedures for the next morning when something in the billing pattern caught her eye. 6 procedures. All routed through an external surgical contractor she'd never heard of. All marked urgent. All connected to military trauma patients from the past month. She cross-referenced them with Coast Guard medical protocols, the one she'd memorized during her pre-deployment briefing 7 months ago. The inflation pattern was systematic. Deliberate. Surgical procedures that didn't match the injury profiles. Equipment charges that were double what they should be. Consultations that never actually happened. Her hand moved to her pocket and found the challenge coin. It was smooth and warm from her body heat. Commander Price had pressed it into her palm 18 months ago in Kandahar, right before her son's medical evacuation. "You got him out," Price had said. "That means you got all of us out. Carry this so you remember." She'd carried it every day since. And now that same commander was upstairs in her hospital, scheduled for procedures he didn't need, connected to a fraud scheme that had been written into billing codes and buried in hospital bureaucracy. At 1:15 a.m., she photographed 3 pages of his file with her phone. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. She was a professional doing professional work, which was another way of saying she was a warrior doing what warriors do, gathering intelligence, staying in the shadows, preparing for the moment when invisibility would no longer be an option. At 1:53 a.m., she overheard Dr. Caldwell on his cell phone in the parking lot, his voice carrying through the staff entrance door that had been propped open for air circulation. "Price testifies on Friday about the offshore equipment contracts," Caldwell was saying. "We can't let that happen. The surgical partner you recommended is getting nervous." Silence. A voice on the other end of the line that Natalie couldn't hear. Caldwell's response came in a lower register, controlled but urgent. "I don't care how you handle it, just handle it. Make it disappear. His leverage. Use it." The call ended. Caldwell's footsteps moved away from the building. Natalie stood absolutely still. Her hand found the challenge coin again. The coin pressed against her ribs like a question she'd been asked 17 years ago and had spent every moment since preparing to answer. This mission was supposed to be surveillance only. Stay invisible. Document the fraud. Protect military patients. Exit clean. But the Coast Guard didn't send Master Chief Petty Officers to hospitals to watch people from the shadows if those people didn't matter. And Commander Price mattered. He mattered because he'd saved her son's life. He mattered because he was about to testify about a crime that was big enough to require an entire infrastructure of lies to hide. At 1:52 a.m., Natalie was reviewing Commander Price's vital signs when his heart monitor began to spike. Not an alarm yet. Just a subtle increase in rate. A tightening of rhythm. She was at his bedside in less than 4 seconds, her eyes moving across his face, checking the clinical signs she'd learned to read in places where diagnostic equipment was less reliable than human instinct. His neck veins were distended. His breathing was shallow. His pulse was narrowing. A bullet fragment had shifted. Cardiac tamponade. The pericardial sac was filling with blood. He had maybe 20 minutes before his heart would have nothing left to pump. She paged Dr. Caldwell 3 times. No response. She paged the attending physician on call. He was 40 minutes away. She stood at the threshold of invisibility and purpose, breathing carefully through her nose, her hand steady on Commander Price's shoulder. And then everything changed. The night shift had its own language. The fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous frequency that only night shift nurses could hear, a sound like insects trapped in glass. Natalie sat in the break room at 11 p.m. with Commander Price's file open on the table in front of her, a cold cup of coffee growing a thin film beside it. The file was thick. Too thick for someone who'd been admitted 72 hours ago. She turned the pages slowly. Page 1, Initial Trauma Assessment. 9 gunshot wounds. 3 to the abdomen, 2 to the left shoulder, 1 through the right thigh, 2 grazing rounds to the ribs, 1 that had lodged near the cardiac plexus. Her eyes moved across the vitals like she was reading a battlefield report, which, in a sense, she was. The Tikrit incident. Fallujah sector. IED aftermath. Commander Price had been conscious when they brought him in, asking about his men before the morphine took over. But then came pages for through 9. 6 surgical procedures were scheduled for tomorrow. 6. She read them aloud to herself, whispering, exploratory laparotomy. Abdominal exploration. Secondary wound debridement. Thoracic imaging with surgical follow-up. Orthopedic consultation for femur stabilization. And a cardiac imaging suite consult. Her finger stopped on the last one. The handwriting was Dr. Caldwell's. She recognized the aggressive slant of his signature already, had seen it scrawled across a dozen other charts in the past 4 days. None of it matched the injury profile. Natalie had 18 years of service with the Navy Medical Corps. She'd worked field hospitals in Kandahar where casualties came in still bleeding from the dusty heat, where you made decisions about who could survive and who couldn't based on what you could see and what the body was telling you. She knew trauma. She knew the difference between necessary surgery and necessary billing. Commander Price's abdominal wounds were through and through on 2 of the 3 hits. The third had lodged in the peritoneal cavity but wasn't actively bleeding. His vitals had been stable for 48 hours. The thoracic wound was near the lung apex but the lung was already re-inflating. The leg wound was a through and through with good vascular integrity. He didn't need 6 procedures. He needed observation, antibiotic coverage, pain management, and time. She pulled her phone out and opened the hospital's internal system. It took 30 seconds to find the routing code for the surgical procedures. All 6 were flagged to go through Meridian Surgical Partners, a private contractor that handled specialized trauma cases for additional fees. The hospital typically used its own surgical team. Meridian was for overflow. Meridian was for cases where someone was taking a cut. The coffee tasted like burnt plastic when she swallowed it. Natalie closed the file carefully and set it on the table. She stared at it for 2 minutes. Then she got up, walked back to the ICU, and found the night supervisor checking vitals on another patient 3 beds down. "Can I ask you something about Commander Price's surgical schedule?" Her voice was steady. It always was. That was the point. People heard steadiness and they didn't hear fear, and they didn't hear questions, they just heard compliance. The night supervisor looked up. Her name was Janet. She'd been at Seattle General for 11 years. "Sure, hun, what's up?" "The 6 procedures scheduled for tomorrow. Can you walk me through the clinical rationale?" Natalie's hands were clasped loosely in front of her. She looked smaller that way, less threatening. Less like someone asking questions. His trauma profile doesn't seem to support all of them. Janet's expression shifted. A nurse for 11 years knows what it means when another nurse starts asking about procedure rationales. It means someone's asking about money. It means someone's noticed something wrong. That would be a conversation for Dr. Caldwell, Janet said carefully. He's the attending on that case. I understand. I just wanted to make sure I understood the clinical reasoning. For continuity of care. Janet's jaw tightened. She closed Price's chart. "Sweetie, if you have questions about a physician's orders, you go directly to that physician. Not the night supervisor. Not the hospitalist. You ask the attending." Her voice had dropped into something colder. Professional distance. "Do you understand?" Natalie understood. She understood that Janet had kids to feed and a mortgage on a house in the suburbs and couldn't afford to be the nurse who asked the wrong questions. She understood that this was how systems protected themselves, by making it impossible to question them without being the person who questioned them. "Of course," Natalie said. "Thank you for clarifying." She was back at the nurse's station when Caldwell appeared at 11:45 p.m., moving through the unit with that particular kind of velocity that doctors use when they want everyone to know they're important and busy. He stopped at the central station, where Natalie was updating Price's fluid balance on the monitor. "Are you questioning my treatment plan?" His voice was pitched low, just loud enough for 3 other nurses to hear. Not loud enough for it to be yelling, but loud enough that everyone understood. Natalie didn't turn around immediately. She finished typing, saved the entry, then turned to face him. I was reviewing the surgical schedule and wanted to understand the clinical justification. For continuity. The clinical justification is that I'm the physician and you're the nurse. How does that sound? She didn't blink. The trick was not to blink. Not to look away. Not to shift weight from one foot to the other like someone was cornered. The trick was to look like you'd heard something mildly interesting and could take it or leave it. Like his words were rainfall and you were concrete. That's clear, she said. I apologize if I overstepped. Caldwell smiled. The smile was the worst part. It was a smile that said he knew exactly what she was doing, and he was going to make sure she never did it again. I'm reassigning your patient load, he said. As of tomorrow, you're moving to post-op recovery on the surgical floor. Janet will take over Commander Price's primary care. It took exactly 1 second for Natalie to understand what he'd done. He'd removed her from the ICU. He'd removed her access to Price's file. He'd removed her from the chain of command overseeing those 6 procedures. And he'd done it with a smile and a calm voice, which meant that if she objected, she'd be the problem. She'd be the nurse who didn't accept her assignment. She'd be the nurse who thought she knew better than the attending. Of course, Natalie said. When do I start? Morning shift. 7 a.m. He turned to walk away, then stopped. He looked back at her. And Natalie? Stop asking questions about my patients. It makes you look like you're not sure about your own capabilities. He walked away before she could answer. The break room at 1 a.m. was empty. Natalie sat at the same table where she'd been 4 hours ago, but now the file was gone, back in the locked cabinet where she couldn't reach it. She pulled up Price's updated vitals on her phone. Stable. Heart rate 78. Blood pressure 110/68. O2 sat 96% on room air. The man was healing. She thought about her son at home, asleep in his apartment 2 miles away. 12 years old. His father wasn't in the picture. It was just the 2 of them, had been for most of the boy's life. And then when Natalie had needed the work, when the Navy had needed her, when Commander Price had called and said he had an opening for a civilian consultant at the hospital and could she come, she'd taken it. Because her son was at the age where he understood that his mother was something other than just his mother. He understood that she mattered somewhere else. That understanding was fragile. It could be taken away if she messed up. If she lost her job. If she became the nurse who asked too many questions and got fired for it. She opened her phone and pulled up the challenge coin in her pocket, the one Price had given her years ago, during her last deployment. Tarnished now, its edges worn smooth. It was a small thing. A nothing thing. A piece of metal that didn't mean anything unless you knew what it meant. On the back were 3 words: duty, honor, sacrifice. Natalie closed her eyes. Then she stood up, walked back to the ICU, and looked at Price through the window of his room. He was sleeping. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of healing. The monitors showed the baseline hum of a body doing what bodies do when they're given time and care. Tomorrow they'd take that time away. Tomorrow they'd schedule him for procedures he didn't need, run him through a private surgical center where someone would get paid for every unnecessary intervention, and by the time it was finished, he'd be weaker. Slower to heal. Compromised. Unless someone stopped it. Natalie walked to the medication cabinet and began her rounds. Her hands moved with the muscle memory of 18 years. She didn't think. She just worked. And somewhere deep inside, in the part of her that had learned to survive in Kandahar and Fallujah and 100 other places where things got quiet before they got loud, something was waking up. The night shift hummed around her. The fluorescent lights buzzed their insect song. And Commander Price slept on, unaware that someone was standing between him and the machinery of a system designed to grind him into profit. For now. The monitor's rhythm changed at 1:52 a.m. One moment the steady beep beep beep, the next a deceleration so subtle that only someone trained in battlefield triage would notice. Natalie stood at the medication cart 3 beds away, counting saline flushes, when her body recognized what her mind hadn't yet processed. The sound was wrong. The pattern was breaking. She turned. Commander Price's chest rose and fell with mechanical regularity, the ventilators hiss filling the ICU corridor, but his blood pressure on the monitor had dropped from 118 to 94 in the last 4 minutes. The central venous pressure was climbing. Muffled heart sounds on the screen. Cardiac tamponade. A bullet fragment. Shifted. Probably when the paramedics had moved him during transport, or when Caldwell's surgical team had positioned him for one of those unnecessary procedures. The fluid was accumulating around his heart, crushing it from the outside, and with every beat the heart was getting weaker. She didn't call for Caldwell. She didn't page the attending. She moved. The crash cart was 15 feet away. Natalie opened the blue metal drawer and located the pericardiocentesis kit without hesitation, the same kit she'd used in a forward operating base outside Tikrit when a Navy SEAL had taken shrapnel and his heart was drowning in its own blood. Her fingers found the 18-gauge needle, the collection syringe, the ultrasound probe. All of it in the exact configuration she'd used 100 times before, except then she'd been doing it by the light of a tactical lamp while bullets carved through plywood walls. This was better. This was sterile. This had electricity and monitors and people who could help. All of it without authorization. Without a physician's order. Without Dr. Caldwell standing over her shoulder telling her to step back, sweetheart. She tore open the kit, prepped Commander Price's chest with antiseptic that smelled like burnt almonds, her hand steady as a surgical laser. Found the 5th intercostal space, the midclavicular line. The needle went in at a 45-degree angle, smooth and controlled, past the muscle and into the pericardial sac. The ultrasound probe guided her with a clarity that made the procedure textbook perfect, and when the needle reached fluid, the syringe filled with dark blood that had no business being there. 50 milliliters drained in the first minute. The monitor responded immediately. Blood pressure climbed. 96, 104. 118, his heart could breathe again. She withdrew the needle with the same precision and tied off a catheter in case they needed to drain more. Secure the line. Documented everything in the chart with her characteristic meticulous notation. Pain is data. Blood pressure improvement is proof. The chart would show exactly what she'd done, when she'd done it, and that it had worked. Then she heard the doors. Not the automatic ICU doors. Not the visitor entrance. The emergency room doors, the ones that faced the parking lot, slamming open with enough force to rattle the medication cabinets. Footsteps. Running. The kind of coordinated movement that didn't come from EMTs with a patient. Gunfire erupted 3 seconds later. The first shot exploded the medication cabinet to her left, sending amber bottles and glass cascading across the tile floor in a sound like shattering ice. Natalie's body moved before her conscious mind issued orders. Muscle memory from 18 years of active duty. She grabbed Commander Price's gurney and shoved it behind the concrete supply wall, that massive load-bearing column that had been engineered to support the entire west wing of the ICU. For tons of reinforced concrete between the patient and whoever had just walked through those doors with intentions that required gunfire. She positioned herself in front of him. The second shot came from a man in dark clothing, face covered, weapon raised with the steady grip of someone trained. Not a random shooting. Professional. Calculated. The kind of precision that meant someone had sent them to finish what 8 bullets from Tikrit had started. The bullet entered her left shoulder. Pain is information. This pain was white-hot, a physical scream that punched straight through her anterior deltoid and shattered the scapula behind it. Her arm went numb for a microsecond, that awful moment where nerve damage outpaces sensation, and then the agony flooded in like boiling water. She didn't cry out. She didn't stagger. She moved. The security guard, Martinez, Navy veteran, retired, had dropped his weapon when the first shot grazed his leg. The pistol lay on the tile 3 feet away. Natalie's right hand reached for it, her training overriding the symphony of pain in her shoulder. Her fingers found the grip. Her stance adjusted to compensate for her left side going offline. Her breathing steadied into the methodical in and out that came from 1,000 hours of range qualification. The second gunman was repositioning, trying to get an angle around the concrete column. The third shot came from a different vector, aimed higher. It caught Natalie across the ribs on her left side, a burn and a tear that felt like someone had drawn a razor across her torso. Her scrubs darkened with blood immediately, the fabric clinging to her in a way that made breathing sharper. 2 bullets. 2 solid hits. Her vision was still crystal clear, her hands still steady, her training still absolute. She fired twice. Both rounds found the first shooter center mass, the chest, the textbook stop zone. He dropped like someone had cut the strings. His weapon clattered away. The second shooter hesitated for exactly half a second, that infinitesimal moment when a human brain processes that their partner just went down. In that half second, Natalie was already tracking to him, her aim following his movement with the terrifying precision of someone who had qualified expert in pistol for 17 consecutive years. Seattle Police Department sirens wailed outside. Distant but closing. The second gunman retreated toward the entrance, firing once more into the wall behind her before he bolted. Boots on tile. The sound of his escape through the ER doors. The sirens getting louder. Natalie didn't follow him. She collapsed against the concrete column, blood pooling beneath her, her breathing shallow and controlled despite the fire in her ribs. Her right hand still held the pistol steady, her body still positioned between the door and Commander Price's gurney. Only when she heard the Seattle PD units arriving, saw the tactical response officers entering through the ER entrance with weapons drawn, did she finally lower the gun and place it on the tile floor where they could see it. "Officer down," someone shouted. "Not down," Natalie managed, her voice level and quiet. "Patient stable. His vitals are," she gestured toward the monitor with her uninjured shoulder, on the screen. "Cardiac tamponade resolved. Don't move him until he's cleared." The paramedics stabilized her with the efficiency of professionals, and she watched them work with the detached expertise of someone who had seen far worse in far worse conditions. They wanted to transport her immediately. She refused. After Commander Price, she said flatly. "Not before." They wheeled her out of the ICU at 2:02 a.m., her left shoulder bound tight, her ribs wrapped, her blood soaking through gauze. She'd lost approximately 400 milliliters of blood, sustained a fractured clavicle and a bullet graze that had missed her spleen by 18 millimeters. 2 inches to the right and the trauma would have been catastrophic. 2 inches to the left and they would have been bagging her. She'd taken the bullets meant for a man who had saved her son's life. By 9 a.m., she was sitting in Administrator Brochman's office, bandaged and discharged, her shoulder screaming beneath the binding. Dr. Caldwell was there, flanked by 2 board members and a private investigator whose shoes cost more than her monthly rent. He looked perfectly composed, not a hair out of place, his expression carefully modeled into concern. "This woman performed an unauthorized emergency procedure without physician oversight," Caldwell said evenly, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. "She endangered staff during an active violent incident. We have no way of knowing whether her actions actually precipitated the shooting or merely exacerbated an already unstable situation." The board members exchanged glances. One of them, a woman named Patricia something, a real estate developer, made a note. "Her credentials are questionable," Caldwell continued. "The procedure she performed, while admittedly effective, is outside the scope of nursing practice in this facility. She violated protocol. She violated physician authority. She created liability." Nobody mentioned that Caldwell had scheduled 6 unnecessary surgical procedures worth $147,000 in billable hours. Nobody mentioned the phone record showing his 6 a.m. calls to these exact board members. Nobody mentioned the contractor he'd been routing patients to, or the 15% kickback structure that had been running for 7 months. The anonymous complaint had come in at 8:15 a.m. Credentials irregularity. Unsafe practice. Insubordination towards senior staff. By noon, Natalie was walking out of Seattle General with a cardboard box containing her badge, her stethoscope, and her name badge. Paid suspension pending investigation. Her left shoulder throbbed with every step. Her ribs felt like someone had wrapped them in razor wire. Her security clearance was already being flagged by an automated system somewhere, a cascade of denials triggering across databases she couldn't access. She'd blown her cover. 17 years of operational security, gone in 2 minutes of pure survival instinct. That evening, her 12-year-old son found her at their kitchen table in the dark. She hadn't turned on the lights. She hadn't called him. She'd just been sitting there for 4 hours, staring at nothing, her left arm in a sling, her ribs bound so tight that breathing felt like negotiation. The tarnished challenge coin, the one Commander Price had pressed into her palm at 2:19 a.m., his voice rough and grateful, sat on the table in front of her, catching the faint light from the neighbor's porch. "Mom? Why are you home early?" She couldn't answer. The words wouldn't form. Because she'd failed. Because the man who had trusted her, the man whose life her son had literally depended on in Tikrit, might still die. Because she'd been assigned to stay invisible and instead she'd become something else entirely, someone the hospital had fired, someone the board had documented, someone whose face was now in a complaint file that would follow her for months. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then she heard it. Rotor blades. Coming from the northwest, moving fast. Low altitude. Structured descent pattern. She knew that sound the way other people knew their own heartbeat. The structured descent pattern filled the pre-dawn silence like a heartbeat returning to the body. Rotor blades cutting through Portland air at 6:03 a.m. 2 UH-60M Blackhawks in tight formation, military precision that made the hospital windows rattle in their frames. Natalie didn't hear them. She was still sitting at her kitchen table in the dark, the tarnished challenge coin pressed so hard into her palm that the eagle embossed on its face had left an imprint in her skin. Her son had asked 3 times why she was home. She hadn't answered yet. The silence in that kitchen had weight. 14 hours of silence. 14 hours of sitting motionless while her left shoulder screamed with every breath, the bullet wound wrapped tight under a borrowed compression bandage she'd stolen from the break room before security walked her to the door. 2 bullets. One through muscle and bone, one that had grazed her ribs close enough that she could still feel the burn when she inhaled. The paid suspension paperwork was on the counter, printed on Seattle General letterhead, citing unauthorized procedures and dangerous conduct. Dr. Caldwell's signature on the termination line was the handwriting of a man who had already won. By 6 a.m., he thought he had won. The helicopters landed in the parking lot like judgment falling from the sky. Not Black Hawks on a training mission. Not medical transport. These were operational descent patterns, controlled, purposeful, the kind that meant business. Hospital staff began appearing at the ER entrance without being called, drawn by the sound and the sight. Administrators came down from the 5th floor. Nurses abandoned their stations. Security radioed for backup, then stopped, uncertain whether backup was needed. 23 uniformed service members emerged from the helicopter bay with the kind of synchronization that only comes from thousands of hours of operational readiness. Coast Guard utilities, garrison covers, everyone moving with the same measured pace. The hospital's automatic doors slid open and they entered in formation, their boots on the tile creating a rhythm that made the fluorescent lights hum louder, as if afraid of being overwhelmed. The crowd parted. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The unit chief was tall, with captain's bars on his collar and the kind of bearing that made oxygen seem scarce. He walked directly to the reception desk, past the security guard, past the administrator wringing his hands. "We're here for Phantom," the captain said. His voice was neither loud nor soft. It was command. The security guard, the one whose weapon Natalie had taken last night, whose hands had shook as he fired alongside her, went absolutely pale. His mouth opened. Closed. He looked at the assembled Coast Guard unit, then at the hospital administrator, then back at the guard captain. "That's," he started. Stopped. Tried again. "That's Master Chief Petty Officer," he said quietly, and the words traveled across the lobby like electricity through water. The room didn't just go silent. The silence was a physical thing, pressing down on every person standing in it. The nurse at check-in set down her pen. The administrator's jaw went slack. A resident standing near the coffee station actually took a step backward, as if suddenly understanding he was standing in the presence of authority he hadn't recognized. The captain nodded once to the hospital staff, then turned toward the ER entrance. Behind him, Commander Price came through the doors in dress uniform, still moving carefully, his left side wrapped tight, for equipment trailing from his right arm connected to a portable pump. He'd been checked out of the ICU 2 hours earlier against medical advice. His eyes found the hospital administrator, then the board members who had called Dr. Caldwell that morning, then Dr. Caldwell himself, standing frozen near the medication station 50 feet away. "Listen up," Commander Price said, and there was no request in his voice, only report. "Master Chief Hayes has 17 years of decorated service. 3 combat tours. Tikrit, Helmand, and the Arabian Gulf. She's a Silver Star recipient." He paused while news cameras that had somehow materialized in the parking lot began filming through the lobby windows. "Last night, she took 2 bullets that were meant for me. Bullets from contractors paid by someone in this hospital." He pointed directly at Dr. Caldwell. "And your staff tried to throw her out for saving my life." The room compressed into a single moment of clarity. A 2-star admiral in dress whites emerged from the second helicopter, walking beside a federal agent in a dark suit who had been sitting in the hospital lobby since 5:24 a.m., recording everything. The admiral carried a document folder. He approached the hospital board members with the deliberate pace of a man who had ended careers before breakfast. "All Coast Guard contracts with Seattle General are suspended, effective immediately, pending federal investigation into billing fraud and conspiracy." His voice could have come through a tactical radio. Precise. Final. The contractors hired to silence Commander Price last night are in custody. They're cooperating. Dr. Caldwell's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His right hand reached for the medication counter, as if he needed something solid to hold on to, and nobody moved to help him. "We have warrants for your financial records and phone logs," the federal agent said to Caldwell directly, stepping closer, his suit jacket hanging open enough to show the federal credential clipped to his belt. "The transactions from your personal account to offshore shells. The phone calls last night coordinating the contractors. All recorded. We arrested both shooters at their safe house in Beaverton at 3:14 a.m. Security appeared, the same guard who had stood beside Natalie as she bled, who had fired his weapon to protect a patient he didn't know was his own superior officer. He took position between Dr. Caldwell and the exit. At attention. Waiting. "Dr. Caldwell, you are terminated effective immediately," the admiral said, and the words fell like an anvil. "Security, remove his credentials." The walk to the exit took 90 seconds. They filmed every step. For news cameras capturing the image of a man who had spent the morning confident in his network, his influence, his board connections, now flanked by federal agents, his hospital badge being removed by the security guard, his office keys being collected, his parking pass being cut from his lanyard in the parking lot where his Mercedes was being photographed by law enforcement. The reporters shouted questions. He didn't answer. He just walked toward a federal sedan parked near the ER entrance, his expensive suit suddenly too large for his frame, his face the color of institutional walls. Natalie was still sitting at her kitchen table when her son came downstairs at 6:22 a.m., ready for school. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs when he saw her in the darkness, still holding the challenge coin. "Mom," he said. "Why are you?" His phone buzzed. Then again. And again. Notifications flooding in. Video clips being uploaded. News alerts. Comments appearing faster than the platform could load them. Coast Guard formation. Hospital staff gathering. Helicopters. The captain's voice asking for Phantom. The security guard's revelation. Commander Price's statement. The Admiral's dismissal. All of it live-streamed by people with their cameras out, all of it going viral in the 43 minutes since the helicopters touched down. He watched her face in the partial light from the kitchen window, recognition moving across his features like a shock. "That's you," he said quietly. Not a question. That was you." Natalie set the challenge coin on the table and looked at her son, 12 years old, half asleep, suddenly understanding that his mother wasn't a nurse. She was a warrior. She was Master Chief. She was the one who had made the decision to stay quiet, to absorb the humiliation, to never break cover even when Dr. Caldwell spilled her lunch tray in the cafeteria. She was the one who had taken 2 bullets without hesitation because that's what soldiers do when the people they love need protecting. "Come here," she said, and he crossed the kitchen and sat beside her at the table. She reached down and picked up the challenge coin, then pressed it into his palm the same way Commander Price had pressed it into hers. "Phantom wasn't just a call sign," she said quietly. "It was the promise I made to myself. That I would be invisible until the moment I was needed. Then I would become unstoppable." He held the coin like it was made of glass. "They thought you were just a nurse." "Most people see what they expect to see," Natalie said. "That's not a weakness. That's camouflage." 6 months later, Natalie stood on the parade deck of Coast Guard Base Seattle in dress whites, the dress uniform pristine, the left shoulder still showing the faintest trace of restricted motion when she raised her arm. The Coast Guard medal hung on her chest, suspended on its ribbon of blue and gold. Commander Price stood beside her, reading the citation in a voice that carried across 300 service members and a crowd of hospital staff members who had requested the day off to attend. Her son sat in the front row wearing the challenge coin on a chain around his neck. The Admiral had polished it the night before, removing the tarnish layer by layer until the eagle shined like new steel. Price himself had placed the chain and fastened it, a gesture that meant something deeper than ceremony. For extraordinary heroism and life-saving actions under fire, sustaining grievous wounds while protecting a fellow service member, Master Chief Petty Officer Natalie Hayes is awarded the Coast Guard Medal. The citation concluded, and the applause was thunder. 3 weeks after that ceremony, Dr. Caldwell's medical license suspension was finalized. The equipment contractor he'd worked with had fled to Panama, his accounts frozen, his family being questioned by the FBI. 14 arrests from the billing fraud investigation. 7 federal charges pending trial. The surgical partnerships dissolved. The kickback schemes dismantled. 6 months after the shooting, someone spotted Caldwell at a strip mall in Gresham, sitting at a folding table with a banner reading "Supplemental Insurance, Ask Me How." His expensive watch was gone, replaced by a digital Casio. His suit had been replaced by a polo shirt with a company logo. His face had hollowed into something unrecognizable, a man trying to rebuild credibility from the concrete floor of a parking lot. He didn't recognize the woman who walked past his table that afternoon. She was in civilian clothes, moving through the shopping center with her son, his hand in hers. The boy was looking at a phone screen, reading something about his mother's medal ceremony. Caldwell tried to call out, to ask if she needed supplemental insurance, but she was already gone, already moving toward the future he would never reach. At the naval base reception, with her family celebrating around her, Natalie found herself standing alone for a moment near the wall of windows overlooking the Puget Sound. A young ensign approached nervously, unsure if interrupting was protocol. "Master Chief," the ensign said quietly, "what you did, staying quiet while he humiliated you, not breaking cover even when he—" Natalie turned, and the ensign saw something in her eyes that had nothing to do with rank or medals. "Power is not a title," she said quietly, and her voice was the voice of someone who had learned that lesson in places this young service member hadn't yet traveled. "Power is the ability to help." The ensign saluted. Natalie returned it, her hand steady, her face calm, and across the room, Commander Price was laughing with her son about something, the tarnished coin now shining on its chain, and for the first time in 6 months, Natalie Hayes smiled. If you or someone you know has witnessed institutional corruption or fraud in healthcare, especially affecting military service members, please report it. Contact the HHS Office of Inspector General, the FBI, or the Coast Guard Office of Investigations. These systems protect us only when we have the courage to report them. Subscribe for more stories of hidden heroes among us, and leave a comment. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true value?